Hey everyone, this is Chris, and you're listening to One Cross Radio, and today we are joined by a very tired Luna, and just me. Today's episode is an interesting one, in the sense of, I already recorded this episode. But any of my fellow podcasters, you might know, sometimes when you record, you catch an audio mistake, and sometimes you can do a quick cover-up. I could not with today's episode. And what happened is there were so many quick fixes that were obvious fixes and just really standing out. Instead of putting out an episode of an inferior product, I thought, why not just re-record it and go from there? And the benefit of that is there's a couple other things I thought about on the walk with Luna that I wanted to talk about. That's the fun thing with these Let's Talk About episodes for me. They are the audio successor to the old collection with thoughts posts I'd write for the website. It's kind of a catch-all, so instead of like diving deep into one particular topic, it's the quick, or not even a quick dive. It's let's share some thoughts on a number of different things. It's kind of a catch-all. You'll also notice today we did not include a video component. That's because I just got back from the walk with Luna. I'm very sweaty, and a sweaty Chris is not fun to look at. I know I try to avoid looking at sweaty Chris at all costs, so I thought I'd spare everybody. Also want to give some awesome shout-outs, which I will at the end anyway, but still, as always, to our dear friend Hector Mirai from Faith and Fandom, and the always awesome Redeemed Otaku team. You guys are great. Looking forward to your next episode when it comes. And Nick, who I unfortunately don't see as much anymore, thank you so much for your comments and encouragement and prayer, man. I really, really appreciate it. And then, of course, as always, to my boys, Dave, Hal, Caleb, Steve. You guys are great for whenever there's some needed prayer requests. I love you guys. And then, of course, as well, for the great increased chats with Mike, Tommy, Christian, and Darko. Love you guys. Actually, while I'm on the shout-out train, also, Jen and Matt from Redeemed Otaku. Sorry, not Redeemed Otaku. Cardboard Koinonia. Sorry, guys, I'm really tired. Jen and Matt, I love you guys. You've been such great prayer warriors for One Cross Radio, 2099 One Cross Street. Me, Jill, and the entire family. Love you guys. And I also know Redeemed Otaku at points they've asked for what they can pray for, so thank you guys. You guys are wonderful. And anybody I missed, no, it's not that I'm trying to dodge you. My entire family is amazing. Dave, Mom, Jude, you guys are wonderful. Sam, Pete, Pip. See, now I'm going down the shout-out rabbit hole. All right, on to today's topic. If I missed you, know that I value you and love you guys. So on to the first part of today's topic. About a month ago at this point, it was D23, and we got the announcement of more Marvel shows, some of which I am super, super, super excited for. First one, sorry for the yelling, but we did it, Gus! We're getting a Moon Knight show! I've wanted Moon Knight for so long. Hal Willis, who was the most recent guest on the Ask a Pastor series, and we posted his episode in December. It was the last episode before we went on our Christmas break. Hal actually is the one who introduced me to Moon Knight, because Hal and I we knew each other in Sunday school when we were kids, and then as things happen, you drift apart and life happens, but then we really reconnected because we were getting baptized at the same time. And then we started hanging out more. We started hanging out with Steve, and the obvious geekdom and love of comics was there. And then Hal had asked me if I'd ever read Moon Knight, and I was like, who? I've never even heard of this cat. So Hal introduced me to Moon Knight, who's a great character. He gets a bum rap of being Marvel's Batman, which is a disservice to Moon Knight, and debatably a disservice to Batman. The similarities are they're both rich white guys who fight crime with martial arts. That's the extent of it. Like that is the beginning and the end. Oh, I guess, and they got butlers that help. But Moon Knight is not on Batman's level as a fighter, and Batman does not have the severe mental health issues that Moon Knight does. And Moon Knight has gotten much more vicious than Batman at points, because at certain points, Moon Knight just straight up kills. Or in a great but very gritty run in the early 2000s, which was my introduction to the character, used sharp knuckles on his fist and, or I think cut Bushman's face off. I don't recall Batman ever doing that. But later Moon Knight runs, his first run with Marvel Now was really good. Jeff Lemire's take on the character, I haven't had a chance to read, but I've heard nothing but good things. Actually, the guy, Rob, who does Comics Explained, he, even in the past, was in the camp of Moon Knight is Marvel's Batman, and the character didn't appeal to him. Jeff Lemire's run is what won Rob over. So that speaks volumes to me. But also, I've heard really, really great things, because it really dives in to the mental health aspect of that character. Because, what's the cliff notes? How can I sum this up? Moon Knight becomes basically the avatar for the Egyptian god, I think, of vengeance. I might be wrong. Or of the moon, Khonshu. So Moon Knight at points does have powers, but then those powers get taken away. Moon Knight is Mark Spector, but he also he has various aliases. I'm going to quickly look them up because there's always one I forget. But the thing is, these aliases become personalities, like full-on personalities, and Moon Knight ends up looking like he has multiple personality disorder. Sorry, give me one sec. I didn't know I would dive into this part. All right, so Moon Knight his main personality is Mark Spector, who he's a mercenary, a soldier, then a mercenary, and then he becomes other characters. As he comes back, he's made money from his career as a mercenary, so then he becomes Stephen Grant, who's the rich character, the socialite. This is where a lot of the comparisons to Bruce Wayne come in. And then he's also Jake Lockley, who's the ear to the streets. He's a cab driver. Each of these personalities has a distinct look, so it's not like, hold up, that cab driver's that really rich guy. They carry themselves in a different way. You could even compare it to in the Christopher Reeve's Superman, and then in the much maligned but underrated Superman Returns, Brandon Routh did the same thing, where Clark Kent and Superman were two very different personas. It's the same with Batman and Bruce Wayne. Moon Knight does this with multiple personalities within one person, to the point that these become people he becomes. It's not just like, well, time to act as Jake Lockley. Like, the persona entirely takes over. Moon Knight later then also added another personality, Mr. Knight, who would work directly with the police. In that Marvel Now run, there was a great opener, a great issue that would be a great way to do in the show, because it's Moon Knight stopping a terrorist attack, and each situation requires skills of each persona. And as Moon Knight is in communication with the police, it's switching into... The police know Mr. Knight, but they don't know the various personas. So that could be a fun way to introduce the audience to this. The other way, it could be a lot of fun. Found footage is hit or miss, but in the comic it was wonderful because it was security camera footage, it was cell phone footage, and then it was just parts of... You could see it, but it was just audio. It could be a terrifically well shot thing. And a series is a great way to go with Moon Knight, because I don't think a movie is the way to start. I'm sure with the right talent it could work, but because there's so much to unpack with this character, I'm not sure an hour and a half to 2.5 hour movie would do service to everything. Whereas if you do it in a series and the series works, then they could consider including him in a movie. I'm so excited about the Moon Knight show. It now might be the thing I'm most excited about out of the upcoming phases. We're also getting a She-Hulk show, which is awesome. I really didn't think we'd get this because I admittedly don't know much about the rights issues. But the reason Marvel hasn't been able to do their like a Hulk solo movie, why he's had so much development in Thor Ragnarok and Infinity War and Endgame, and he has only been in the team-up movies, is because Universal owns the rights to do a Hulk solo movie. I think they still own the rights to Hulk characters. Now, at points, they've made the exception of allowing Thunderbolt Ross in, but it's why we haven't seen a hint of Abomination. It's why we haven't heard anything of Betty. So as far as I knew, but I guess I know wrong, they didn't have access to the Hulk's character pool. But now they seemingly do. So that maybe they've got the go around with the show on a streaming service instead as a film, and maybe Universal's getting some of the money for it. I'd be really interested to find out. But it's a show that we weren't expecting, but that's genuinely exciting and awesome. The other one that's really exciting is Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel is very different now than she was when Carol Danvers, the current Captain Marvel, was Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel has shape-shifting ability in the sense of, shape-shifting isn't exactly correct because that's like Odo from Star Trek or the Skrulls in Marvel. She's, I guess, shape-shifting in the comparable sense to Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four. But she's a really interesting character. She is a Muslim American. She hero worships. She writes fan fiction about the Marvel superheroes. She geeks out entirely whenever she meets these other heroes. So there's a lot. She can be the audience insert character. She is an example, I'd say, of diversity done right in the comics, because Marvel at times gets a lot of just and unjust flack about how they're not diverse enough. At times it's just shoehorned in my opinion, and done to a disservice, where it's like, all right, hey, we get our participant thing. Look how diverse we are, where we're just changing stuff willy-nilly for no reason. DC does the same thing, where a good example of, I'd say, diversity done right is Miles Morales is not Black Peter Parker. Miles is his own character. He has stories that would not work for Peter that organically work for him, that are great for representation. Now, I recognize there's an irony here of a white boy talking about diversity and all that, but let's separate that. I think that's a fair thing to say. Miles is a great character. He's not just someone who was race or gender swapped to be like, hey, look how diverse we are. Miles is an organic character. Miguel O'Hara, to me, even though, yes, he was pretty pale in complexion, he was also a great... He's not the Scottish Hispanic Peter Parker. He's his own character. His family were their own characters. This was all done very, very organically. It's not just, again, someone being race or gender swapped. It works. So I think Miss Marvel, I'd group in with that. She's very much her own character. She's not just someone who's just thrown in. Anytime they introduce diversity into the comics, people will automatically jump to, unfortunately, people will often jump to it's just, you're just trying to get the points or whatever. Where, yeah, you can make that argument a lot of times, and at times it's maybe half the time or so, it's actually correct. At times more than half the time. But you can't make that argument with Miss Marvel, I don't think. Diversity is very important. Representation is great. I get it. As a straight white guy, I've never had much of a problem of finding characters I can identify with. When I apply it to my Christian faith, though, substantially less. But it's great to see someone who can recognize themselves in print on the screen. It's all awesome. I'm going in on a trail I didn't think I'd go on. I'd love to have this conversation with someone else at another time, because representation is important, but I think there's a good way to do it. Anyways, Miss Marvel. I'm just repeating myself. I'll move along. So the next thing I kind of wanted to talk about was my thoughts on Young Justice Season 3, which was a mixed bag for me. I was really excited that Young Justice was coming back, but in the end, what I got was not necessarily what I fully wanted. I'm curious to see what's going to happen with Young Justice Season 4. Like, I'm still in, but let me say why it's not necessarily what I wanted. This season was very focused on the outsiders. Young Justice Season 2, it moved the story forward, but I still think it had a good amount of focus on the core team that was introduced in Season 1. Season 3, a lot of those characters got pushed aside for the new characters, and that's what I didn't want. A good comparison I can make is from the Amazing Justice League series as it evolved into Justice League Unlimited. Because Justice League, the series, it just focused on the 7 of Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, Wonder Woman, Flash, Hawkgirl. The first 2 seasons of that show, 2 or 3, were focused entirely on those 7. When you got to Unlimited, suddenly there is legit at least 100 new characters. So, and at least half of those 100 are just peripheral background players who get little moments. But it was great because outside of a bat embargo, which at some point, if I do a deep dive into Justice League, will be its own deep topic, they had use to virtually every character, with the exception of very few, because of shows that were other cartoons that were on the air at the time, or live action shows that were being developed. You suddenly had all these new characters. The toy chest was open, but they were instead of now having focus on the core 7, each episode would focus on one of the original 7, 1 or 2, while also splitting focus with these new characters, which was a great way to make you care about the new characters, because you weren't upset that all the focus was now away from the core 7, the reason that you're at this new show. And they did I thought they did an amazing balance of that. Young Justice Season 3 especially did not hit that balance, where there was a lot less focus on the original team and a lot of focus was going to the new team, and I didn't love the new team as much as I loved the old team. I also wanted much more focus on Tim Drake, because Tim Drake's awesome, as Hector and I talked about in that the last chat with Hector. And Tim did not get a lot of moments in the new season. I was really hoping he would. There was a number of good things, but the season overall, I felt struggled with pacing. They were introducing so much that certain story elements would be dropped for like 4 or 5 or 6 episodes. There was one episode in particular where it almost felt like the writers and everybody was like, "Oh shoot, we finish in 3. We're done in 3 or 4 episodes, so we gotta get everything out in this episode." There was, I kid you not, about 2 or 3 2 to 3 minute long dialogue, 2 to 3 minute long monologues for characters, just exposition, just getting everything caught up. And you could have spread this out over 3 episodes. You could have had one of the big stories culminate and lead into everything, because it all eventually tied together, but you could have split this up a bit. The characterization of certain characters could have been done better. Halo was a very interesting character, but also very confusing, because at points she's an example, I'd say, of representation, but not done particularly well. Halo's character is that of so she's a mother box in a dead body, and the body was on a woman who wore a hijab. Great, no problem. As the show kept going, though, suddenly at points later on, there was a very pointed scene about her feeling she's non-binary, which fine, but she was introduced as she, and she's like, I don't know if I'm a she. I don't know if that sounds right because of the mother box, and I'm figuring out who I am. And there was a very good conversation about, like, all right, we'll respect that. Within the same episode, they go back to just strictly referring to Halo as she. Later, it's suddenly a character is lying to her. I'm trying not to spoil too much. A character is lying to her, and then she's randomly drinking. She's a teenager, so she's rebelling. But in that, she also randomly starts kissing another female character, which is really out of left field. And then they don't ever really address it again. They kind of address it later, but not really. So it's all these moments of you're throwing in the representation, but there's also no follow-up, and it doesn't really stick with the character. So it took me out a number of times, and I know from a lot of people from various sides were like, what the heck is going on with her? Like, don't just be like, hey, look at all this good representation stuff we're doing when there is no follow-up. But there was still good elements to that character. I'd love to see how she gets developed in Young Justice Season 4. And I'm very interested to see the follow-up to it. Alright, so next up, I wanted to talk about, it's now an old story, but it's, well, not old, but, so, a while ago, Kevin Smith, who I still find enjoyment out of his work. I don't recommend it often, especially to other Christians, because of how crass and vulgar it can be. Because there is stuff that can I know people who it can really negatively affect, so I don't automatically recommend it. But an example of a film that there's still something I get out of, but even more so the documentary, the making of behind it, is Clerks 2, for example. It has a very, very potty mouth, so I don't watch it often. It's maybe once every 3 or 4 years. But what I can really appreciate it is the heart behind it. Because it is about characters who are in their 30s still trying to find their way and figure out what it is they're doing in life and where they want to go in life and what their goals are, what their dreams are. Who have been like stuck in the day-to-day everything where they're realizing like what's going on. That's something I can identify with. I think that's something most people can identify with. And it's done in a really, really good way. So I appreciate heart behind stories, especially after what the last 5 months of our personal lives have been recently. And this was a really heartwarming story. Kevin Smith is now done filming his next film, another Jay and Silent Bob reboot. But he had years ago, he had been best friends with actor and director Ben Affleck. He actually debatably helped with Affleck's break. He was the first one to give him a lead. Affleck was in every one of Kevin Smith's films, from like Mallrats. Affleck was the lead in Chasing Amy. He was in Dogma. He had a brief cameo in 2 spots in Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back. One was absolutely hilarious with Matt Damon. I'm still waiting for Good Will Hunting 2 hunting season. And then he was in Jersey Girl and then Clerks 2. And he hadn't shown up since. Because Kevin Smith will often share stories that debatably aren't his to share. So Affleck and him kind of fell out of touch. Last year, Kevin Smith had a heart attack, and he never heard from Affleck, and he assumed their friendship was dead, but he was deliberately not texting him to find out. He's like, ignorance is bliss, and I'd much rather not know that this person doesn't like me or doesn't care about me anymore. So I can't remember the name of him, but there was a guy who, an entertainment journalist who was a huge fan of Kevin Smith's films, and you can actually see clips online of the guy wherever he'd be talking to somebody who had been doing films with Kevin Smith. He'd just throw in a little quick reference to the View Askew movies, where he was interviewing Matt Damon for one movie, and he asked him, like, so when's Good Will Hunting 2 hunting season coming out? So Affleck was doing the promotion for his Netflix movie, and then the guy was like, hey, did they call you for reboot? And then Affleck's like, no, they haven't, but I'm free. So the shorter version is people in Kevin Smith's camp, the producer, Jason Mewes, his like best friend, heard, and they were like, reach out to him, like you should really reach out to him. And Smith was hesitant. He eventually did, and then Affleck's in the movie, but as he's sharing the story, he's like, I got my best friend back. Like, there was this huge hole in my heart that I got back. And there was a great quote that I can't fully remember about how as you get older, you just want to make believe with your friends again. And I'm 32. I'm not that old, but it's a sentiment I really understand. Heck, even with Mike, Christian, Tommy, and Darko, we all realized when we recorded that podcast after we recorded the 3-part podcast, we were all like, man, we've known each other since like 4th grade, middle school, and early high school. Like, even though we're all still friends, we haven't chatted with each other as much. Like, there's not many relationships and friendships like this. Like, we should do this. And since then, we've been like talking a lot more, and it's been awesome. And so, like, that was a really heartwarming story for me. And like I said, and I'm just still not going to get into the details. Like, the last 5 months, or 5.5 months, have been some of the roughest of my life. So as I'm hearing, I needed heartwarming. So as I heard that story, I was like, that's awesome. And it just really resonated because it was going on as well with these other friends who I hadn't seen in a while. And it did lead me to reaching out to others who sometimes friendships just kind of slide. Life happens, but I'm like, no, I need to put more of an effort into this. So that was just wanted to talk about that and how it just hit me where I live. All right, so the next topic is several. It's just Star Trek thoughts. Lately, Jill and I have been revisiting Star Trek in a not a big way, but in a big enough way. I've been watching some great episodes of Next Gen because Next Gen is wonderful. I feel a DS9 run coming in me. I feel it in my bones. I know what's going to happen. But Jill and I have been rewatching Voyager, which is a mixed bag. It's last time I watched through, I was like, man, I was giving it a lot of grief. But there's elements to it that are winning me over. Now there's also parts that, like TNG and DS9, when they do a comedy episode, like, it was hilarious. Voyager, I think when they tried to do lighter episodes that were like deliberate comedy episodes, I don't know if they worked, but the show is hilarious unintentionally. Now, what I mean by that is not when it's trying to be serious, it's funny. Like, it's so bad it's funny. But last night we just watched an episode from the 3rd season called Blood Fever, where a Vulcan ensign is going through Ponfar, which is a Vulcan thing of, like, you need to go home every 7 years. Like, there's an overwhelming urge to go home and take a mate. Well, they're stranded in the Delta Quadrant, so they can't do that. And then he tries to make this happen with B'Elanna Torres, who is a half human, half Klingon, and Klingons are very aggressive. And he starts to mind meld with her a bit, and then it causes her to go through the pon farr. So there's a lot of moments where it's like her behavior is very awkward, so it's very funny. There's one scene in particular where Vulcans are insanely private. Tuvok goes in, who is the chief of security in a Vulcan. He goes in to talk to the Vulcan ensign, and it's just it's Vulcans being awkward, which is hilarious. But then towards the end, the culmination of the episode is like B'Elanna and Tom, who eventually get married, like, Tom, you need to help her. And then they leave. But when they leave, they legit just walk like 4 feet away and hide around some bushes. Like, it's just really, really funny when you pause to think about it. There's a lot of great comedy in Voyager. At one point, I will say, there was one line that was delivered that was definitely intended to be funny, and it was hysterical. Janeway can't get coffee. When you watch Next Gen, Captain Picard is a huge fan of Earl Grey tea. He always gets from the replicator tea, Earl Grey, hot. Janeway always gets coffee, but she can't get coffee, and the replicators aren't working, so she can't use the rations. And then basically there's some stuff in the nebula that could give them power where they can get coffee. And then she's dramatically and seriously like, there's coffee in that nebula. And I get you, Janeway. I understand. But I'm enjoying revisiting Trek a lot. But I'm also doing it in other ways. Reddit, for example. I really enjoy Reddit, but the internet is a hive of scum and villainy. So there is good and bad on Reddit, but thankfully when you set up a profile, you can block the bad stuff. So there's a lot of great fun subreddits, and one of them is the Star Trek one. And actually there's like 15 Star Trek subreddits. But the one that led to a great conversation was the opinion of who would win between the Borg and the Dominion. The Dominion was the big bad of DS9, who really gave the Federation a run for their money and potentially could have destroyed them eventually. Or the Borg, who, in my opinion, is the big bad of Trek, the best big bad of Trek, bar none. So it's been fun to go through that conversation of like who could win, because both nearly beat them. The Dominion come from the Gamma Quadrant. They're broken down like there's the Founders, who are the shapeshifters, the species that Odo is, who fancy themselves gods. There is the Vorta, who are a species of clones, basically, where there's Weyoun, who there was Weyoun, who was killed, and then you get 8 subsequent Weyouns, because in total there's 9, who can act almost as the front of the Federation, not the Federation, the Dominion, who worship the Founders as gods. They can be the face until the Founders reveal themselves to the rest of the galaxy. There's the Jem'Hadar, who is the fighting force. They are a species bred for combat, but they're also to survive. They need a stimulant, a drug called Sikacel White. Eventually, the Dominion also forge alliances with species in the Alpha Quadrant, the Breen, who are also another warrior race, and the Cardassians. So the Dominion is very large and varied force, and with the Jem'Hadar, the thing is they can pump out ships. They can pump out the species right away. So say you have a huge victory against the Dominion where you take out a portion of their fleet, 2 weeks later, maybe even less, that portion's back. The Borg, who are basically unchallenged outside of some writing issues at times in not DS9 and in Voyager. They went to the Borg well a bit too often, but you can understand why. Especially after the Kazon fiasco. The Borg are virtually unchallenged as the strongest species, with the exception of species 8742, who the Borg can't assimilate. And species 8472 are crazy. They destroy Borg. Self-deprecating joke, like I destroy donuts. Their ships can become like planet-destroying weapons. They destroy cubes and everything like super easy. Their ships are like bio ships. Their technology is part of them. The Borg, it's all about like technology assimilation and everything taking over, but they can't even assimilate because of how dense and thick the blood of, or I can't remember exactly how it works, the species 8472. Eventually, through the Voyager season 3 two-parter leading into season 4, like Voyager has to help them. They are able to get on, I guess, almost equal footing with species 8472. But still, like, seeing something much stronger than the Borg is crazy. But outside of them, the Borg are virtually unchallenged, and it's fun to compare. The Borg come from the Delta Quadrant, but in some ways they do share some borders with the Dominion. There has never been, at least canon-wise, a documented crossover between the two. So it's fun to talk about who would win. To me, absolutely, no question, the Borg would win. Now, how, like, in the long run, if it's a one-off where a single cube goes into Dominion territory, you know what? Between the Jem'Hadar and the Breen, they might eventually take down that cube. But if they send more than one, and they would send another, and multiple, then it's no question. Once the Borg adapt to the weapons, it's done. I think once they start assimilating Jem'Hadar, that would take away the absolute dependency on the sickle cell white. They could start adapting the Breen. It's a question of whether or not they could adapt a Founder, but when they can adapt everything else and destroy everything else, and then the Founders have nothing except they're stuck on their planet, then that's not gonna matter much. It's fun to wonder if they can adapt a shapeshifter because it's nanoprobes in the blood, but friggin' it's an entirely liquid being. Does it even bleed? It's interesting, but it's a fun conversation, but I do think the Borg would win. Other Trekkies, let me know what you think. I've also recently been reading Michael Piller, who was a great writer on Star Trek, wrote some of the greatest episodes of TNG. I believe was partially a creator and showrunner on DS9. I might be wrong. Also helped Voyager for the first couple of years. He passed away a couple of years ago. He wrote the excellent book called Fade In that I'm really, really enjoying. He wrote Star Trek Insurrection, which is the TNG movies outside of First Contact are not remembered that well. Generations was a mixed bag. At one point, the amazing episode Yesterday's Enterprise was considered the premise for a movie, and I was like, diggity dang, that would have been awesome. But then how can the timeline is different, where it was almost like, shoot, we should have done Yesterday's Enterprise as the movie instead. Generations was what it was. First Contact is one of the best Trek movies. It's tied, and its position changes for me from time to time, with Wrath of Khan as up there in the best Treks. Nemesis was a great film budget 2-part episode. It was a mixed bag. It was like I still enjoy it, but it's not perfect. In the book, though, there is what is Pillar's first story pitch, And to me, that was much better than the movie we got, where it really would have leaned in on the Fountain of Youth. There would have been a character named Joss, who was half Romulan, half Klingon, which would be abhorrent to Worf, who they would establish why he's on helping out with the Enterprise and not on DS9. Would have tied into younger Picard, would have tied into an old friend of his. It really would have leaned into the Fountain of Youth story. It would have shown why Picard was rebelling a lot more. It would have leaned into how the planet that has the stuff that like causes the de-aging, the essential Fountain of Youth, why it leads to these tendencies more than Insurrection did. It also would have done a great part of the thing they were trying to do is also show like the awkward growing stages between the Federation of the TOS timeline and movies and the Next Generation Federation, where there's a marked difference between what the expectation of command is from Kirk and what it is from Picard. So that would have been great to really explore. It wouldn't have been 100% perfect, but even though I enjoy Insurrection, as I was reading through that, I'm like, oh my goodness, that would have been, I think that could have been a great movie. It was not pursued on the first draft. I don't even know, I would have loved to hear Patrick Stewart's thoughts about it, but it wasn't even, the first draft wasn't even pitched to Patrick Stewart, because it's like, the main producers we're finding like you're saying that like we're really focused on how old they are. We're saying this commander is old, and the only time they're interesting is when they're getting young again, which I did not feel as I was reading the thing. I'm like, I get what you're going for. It's youthful exuberance. It's rediscovering who you like, parts of who you were, but in who you are now. I think it could have been a great flick. If you can, you can find the book online for free, but you can also purchase it. It would be, and buy online for free. I don't even mean pirating. I mean, it was not allowed to be published for a long time, so Michael Piller put it up for free. You can still find it, I think, on his website or other official websites for free, but it has since been released in a payment form. Check it out. It's really great. The other thing I do want to say, I do want to recommend to check out is a great documentary about DS9 called What We Left Behind. It was a documentary done over a couple of years. I don't often like documentaries. My joking answer is because I get enough of life sucking and humanity being terrible through my job. So when I don't need to watch documentaries about drug cartels and murderers and stuff. Get enough of that in my line of work. But I do enjoy documentaries when it's about the making of movies or the making of shows or stuff like The Toys That Made Us or this kind of thing. And What You Left Behind is a great Trek documentary looking at the impact of DS9. You can make the argument at times it's too patting on its own back sentiment, but it's really, really good. There's stuff they could have dived into more because there was at times a lot of behind the scene drama, but there's some really great stuff. It also features like some of the last interviews with Aaron Eisenberg, who passed away this past week, who played Nog on the show. It looked at what would have been the hypothetical season 8, how it would have started. It's a really, really good documentary. I'd really recommend picking it up. You can find it on iTunes. Standard definition is $9.99 to buy. There is a Blu-ray. There is a DVD. It's well worth a watch. There's some other good Trek documentaries. Another one I'd really recommend is Chaos on the Bridge, that looks at the very, very drama-filled first 3 behind-the-scenes issues of the first 3 seasons of Next Generation. And finally, I do want to give a shout out to an excellent Star Trek podcast called The Next Conversation. They are going through the Next Generation episode by episode. To any Christian listeners who are interested, at times they do swear a bit, so if that's something that can negatively affect you, maybe skip it. But if that's not something that does negatively impact you. I find it to be a great podcast. The first part, they did the episode on the first part of the Outstanding Best of Both Worlds episode, and it was hilarious. I never realized how much I want a parody of that episode and how ripe for parody it is. And it could be the funniest Trek parody ever. Yeah. So that is today's episode. Final thing I want to include is some prayer requests. Please keep my family in prayers. And please keep some friends. I don't know if I have their permission to say their names. So I've got some friends who are potentially moving to Europe next year. I've got some friends and family who are going to do missions work also in Europe. So please keep them in your prayers as they are sorting up for funds. It's a huge transition, moving to a different country, learning a different language. You're going to be teaching, but it's a huge thing. So please keep them in your prayers. Also, please keep some other family and friends in your prayers, as they are a couple of people I know have recently proposed to get married, which is amazing. Please keep them in your prayers. As for the engagement period and the eventual wedding, and also please pray for other family. Again, I don't know if I have the permission to say the name, so I won't. Who have recently got married, which is awesome and exciting. But it is a big transition. It's a huge change. Marriage is wonderful. It's amazing. It is a big adjustment. So please keep them in your prayers. For me as well, my health is a bit up and down. Even though I'm coming out of 5.5 months of just getting my butt whooped emotionally, there's still some anxiety issues and mild depression issues, where there's certain days where it's just incredibly rough and it's a really down day. But there are some potential changes in life coming up as well, as I'm just figuring out some stuff. So please keep all that in your prayers. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of One Cross Radio. As always, I do hope this, even an episode like this, somehow, some way, my constant prayer is that it points you towards the love of Christ. Jesus is incredible and amazing. I cannot describe how wonderful and awesome he is. I hope that if you don't know him, that this podcast and website still points you to him. And if you don't know him, I hope and pray that you'll consider asking your Christian friends about Jesus and looking into Scripture and the love of Christ and the love of God. All that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for all your support. And God bless, my friends. Take care. Peace.